Morla David, Adonai Roi Lo Epsar, Steshi Arbiseni, Amen Nukosina Aleni, Nafshi Yishovei, Yancheni B'Maglei Tzedek, L'man Shemo, Gam Ki Lech B'Geit Salmoves, Loi Rorok Yatvai Modi, Shiftacho Mishantecha, Hemi and Achamuni, Harot Uponai Shulchan Neget Sororoi, Ishanta Vashemen Roshi Kosir Vayah, Achtov Chesed Yerdufuni Koyem Echayoi, Shabti B'Beis Adonai Liorech Yamim. Song of David, the Lord is my shepherd, I shall not lack. God causes me to lie down in lush pastures. God leads me beside tranquil waters. God restores my soul and guides me in righteous paths for God's name's sake. Though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil, for you are with me. Your scepter and staff, they comfort me. You prepare a table before me in full view of my adversaries. You have anointed my head with oil, my cup overflows. May only goodness and kindness pursue me all the days of my life, and I shall dwell in the house of the Lord for length of days. In just a little bit more than a week, we're going to be celebrating the very famous holiday of Hanukkah. And the image of the Jewish people finishing their battle and coming to the temple and not having enough oil to light the candles of the menorah, and then miraculously having the lights of the menorah burn on for numerous days, is a very striking image. Of course, one could ask, if God was going to bring a miracle in the temple, there could have been all kinds of miracles in the temple. Is there any special significance to the candles of the menorah versus another one of the many services in the temple? And many talk about the fact that the lights of the menorah represent light at a time of darkness. And that, of course, is very meaningful. But there's another idea about the significance of the candles of the menorah, and that is flame, unlike so many other things in this world, flame can only come through action. Something has to happen in order to create a fire. And in a sense, the message of the candles of the menorah is the Jewish people pushed themselves forward so much, risked their lives for what they believed in, fought this almost ridiculous war for the sake of their principles. And as a reflection of that, God brings a miracle specifically with flame. That's all about what a person does, the effort a person puts forward. There are many things that stand out about Art Sapper. I'll share Ben Benachim and Mordechai. Sorry. There are many things that stand out about Art Sapper. He was clearly a brilliant person. But when I think of Art, who I had the good pleasure to know for years, what actually stands out most in my reflections is his tremendous zest and excitement, particularly about the pursuit of wisdom and knowledge. How many times, I was mentioning to the family, I had a conversation with him this past Sunday morning upstairs after davening, and it was a conversation, the frame of the conversation was something that I had dozens of times with him over the years. Rabbi, I wanted to share something with you that I was reflecting on over Shabbos. I mentioned it to Deborah. Deborah said, sure, we were talking about that at the table. And he said, what does Jacob's ladder look like? We call it a ladder. Was it really a ladder? I've looked into it, I've done research, and there was another thing. I'm not even going to try to say the term properly because I'm sure I'm going to mispronounce it. If Art was here physically, if Art was well and with us, he would, with a very kind smile, correct me. But Rabbi, you should know that palaces in those times had a certain stair structure. And I think when they talk about it as a ladder, that's not the correct translation. I think it's more that stair structure, and that would have been so meaningful to Yaakov. It was said very clearly. It clearly was a reflection of thought and intelligence. But what strikes me the most when I think about it is the excitement with which he conveyed it. How many conversations that I have with Art that he conveyed an idea with that he had worked on, that the average person in Shul wouldn't have the foggiest idea about? And he was so excited about it. To hear him talk about the proper way that Hebrew letters should be pronounced. He was passionate about it, but he was so excited to share it. I have very fond memories. My seat and shoulder is right near where the chazan stands. When he would daven for the Amid, when he would lead the prayers, he would do it with such, you could see it in his body language. He was so excited to do it. He was so happy to do it. And if all of that excitement was true in conveying ideas, how much more was it true when talking about his family? There's just one thing there, and I'm sure it's one of many examples, but it's the thing that just keeps on coming back to me. I've had different conversations with him over the years about his strategies for engaging his grandchildren at the Seder. And he put a tremendous amount of energy, I suppose in terms of the ages, we're primarily talking about the Brodsky children over the years. But I don't remember the details. I remember there was one year that he hired somebody or another to show up in the middle of the Seder. And again, all very, very creative and important, but with such a unique energy, verve, and excitement. There's a lot of people in this world who have a lot of talents. There's a lot of people who do a lot of things, who say a lot of things, all great. But he carried it with such a unique excitement. And then, over the past day or two, I've obviously been thinking a lot about him. And actually, in meeting with the family yesterday, forgive me for repeating myself, I commented on it when meeting with the family. I was so struck in seeing the unique, believe me, I meet with families at difficult times frequently, the unique care and consideration from one sibling to another, for each of the siblings, whether it be in person or by phone, at an extremely emotionally difficult time. And I was struck by it. And then I thought for a moment and I realized that's how their father always was. A person of unique dignity, unique consideration. Whenever he would share with me a thought, he would always refer to me in the third person. Could I share something with the rabbi? It was very kind and sweet, and some people do that. I don't need people to do that, but he was clearly conveying a personal regard for my position and as another human being. And now I want to loop back to sharing of ideas. There are many people who have creative ideas that they share. I don't think many people share them with the excitement that he would share them. But those people who do share them with excitement, to be very candid, many times when people are excited to share an idea, they're excited to share an idea because they want you to know how smart they are. It's a very common thing. I didn't feel that bit when Art Sapper was talking to me. I felt that he had come across something that he was so excited about, and he wanted to share it with other people, just because he had found this treasure. Here's another human being who he likes and respects and wants to share that treasure with. And that's a beautiful character, and honestly, a rare combination. Many of the type A focused personalities have no interest in anyone else. But to be so focused and so passionate and yet so kind and so considerate is truly a special combination. The verse in Mishlei says, Ner Hashem nishmas adam, which can be translated in different ways, but one way to translate it is that the soul of a person is really an expression of God's flame. And Art Sapper wasn't here with us long enough, as far as we're concerned. But in his time here, he put so much energy into lighting his own flame. And all of the energy and all of the creativity which he put into lighting his own flame should stay with his soul for eternity as it goes on to another world. And if I may, I just want to share with Deborah who was his tremendous life partner for decades, and each of his children, and of course grandchildren, that every time in your lives moving forward, that you conduct yourself with some creativity, with some verve, and or do it with a special sense of care and dignity for others, you're tapping into this beautiful flame that you've been exposed to for all these years, and you're keeping it burning in our world. May his memory be a blessing to all of his family and friends, and a true source of inspiration to all. Well, very much.
As the oldest of my father's children, I was lucky enough to have more time with him than the rest of them. And I wanted to share some memories that were from my early childhood that they unfortunately were not with us yet for. And I hope they illustrate who he was. When I was a very young child, from when I was 3 years old, my father would take me outside at night when it wasn't raining or snowing. And we would sit on the front stoop of the house that we lived in Bethesda, Maryland. And if it was summer, he would let me chase after fireflies, and he would tell me the science about how fireflies lit up. And if it was fall, we would look at the leaves. And as it got darker, he would pick up a blade of grass and put it between his thumbs and show me how to make it whistle and play it like an instrument. And then we would start on the math. We would play mystery number for an hour, hours at a time. And he, by the time I was 4 years old, had taught me basic algebra. A fact that my algebra teachers in Yeshiva High School were not that appreciative of. But at 4 years old, he had me graphing lines, graphing basic algebraic equations. When I was old enough to entertain myself a bit, he would, as everyone knows, he was very dedicated to his profession, and he would go downtown on the weekends to work. And he would take me with him. And if I was able to color nicely and entertain myself, when he was done, we would spend the afternoon at a museum. I could pick any museum I wanted. I probably went to the Air and Space Museum 100 times before I turned 7. And we would learn about dinosaurs and minerals and art. And my father loved learning, and he wanted to give his family opportunities that he didn't have. He always wanted things to be better. He wanted to be able to provide the best for his children. He told me once how much he admired my mother's father, who lived his life with a sense of contentment that I think my father envied. And he would say, I have the best car, I have the best children, I have the best home, I have the best wife. But my father never had that sense of contentment. He always wanted to make things better. And I think, despite the joy that he had in all his family, he always wanted things to be better. He never settled for what was. Over the last few days, I think it has been very hard for some of us that this happened after what was supposed to be a routine procedure, and nothing of a procedure. But I was thinking back on why he had that procedure. It was because his heart was limiting his ability to be active and do the things he wanted to do, walk to shul, take his grandchildren out places. And I realized that maybe it's appropriate that he had this procedure to try to restore him to where he wanted to be, because he wouldn't settle for being crippled, for being infirm. He wanted it to be better. And maybe that was an appropriate way for him to pass. Thank you.
Son-in-law Rabbi David Brodsky.
What a terrible loss we're all experiencing right now. Abba was such a special person. There was one term I would use to describe Abba, it would be ish emes, a man of truth. Abba was the type of person that sought out truth, and when he found it, there was nothing that could stop him from keeping it. It didn't matter if it was unpopular. It didn't matter if very few people did it, and it didn't matter if he was the only person doing it. If he believed firmly in something, he proudly and fiercely kept it. Whether it was when he and Ema were becoming observant later on in life, when it's not necessarily so easy to do, to make significant changes in all aspects of your life when you're already more set in your ways, when none of your friends are doing it, that didn't matter. But when the first Orthodox shul that he attended was 2 miles away from where he lived, that didn't stop him from walking there and back every single Shabbos. Or if that same shul happened to be Sephardi and pronounced Hebrew differently than what he had heard growing up, that didn't stop Abba from thoroughly researching the topic of Hebrew pronunciation, coming to a conclusion, and completely changing the way he pronounced Hebrew in a very significant way, even if no one else around him pronounced it that way. That didn't matter. If Abba believed it was correct, he did it proudly, courageously, and unabashedly. Abba always had a great love and respect for Torah. He religiously attended his weekly Shabbos learning group and rarely missed a week. He also attended the Kolos weekly Sunday morning class for many years. He also spent many hours reading his many Torah journals and Torah emails, and he was very knowledgeable in Jewish law. He was very proud of the fact that his son-in-law was a rabbi and a Torah scholar. He always gave me a lot of respect. In fact, he was always very happy to bring me along to his Shabbos group, and he was always so proud to say, my son-in-law is joining us this week, the rabbi. He always gave me, I remember how proud he was when Mordecai got married. He once commented to me shortly thereafter, I have a son-in-law who's a rabbi, now my daughter-in-law's father is a rabbi. I'm so lucky, what did I do to deserve this? Abba also worked very hard and spent a lot of time and money to ensure that his children had the best Jewish and secular education possible. He always did his best to make Yiddishkeit fun and exciting for the next generation. As was mentioned, the Seder is one example of many. He had so much nachas learning with our son, his grandson, Yitzchak, for a whole year before his bar mitzvah. We're so fortunate to have been able to see him at the bar mitzvah. Little did we know that that would be the last time we ever saw him. Abba, you will be sorely missed. I would like to ask Mechila from you, if there is anything I ever did to offend you, may you be a Meili Tziyosher for your family and for all of Klal Yisrael. Yehi Zikro Baruch, Bila Amavis Lanetzach, V'Bachla Hashem Elokim Zimah Miyal Kochanim.
Mordecai.
You know, as the third of 4 children, I was talking with my younger sister earlier today, and we're used to kind of getting the scraps, whatever's left over. And I'm so grateful that 80% of my speech survived the first 2 speakers. And it's really more of a testament to how rich and vibrant and varied a life my father lived. Thank you all for being here to honor him. My father did not have the easiest childhood. He was the son of 2 immigrants. Having lost his father to cancer when he was 2 years old, he was raised most of his life in a blended family that was non-observant. On top of it all, he had a severe stutter growing up. At the time of his death, he was a father of 4, grandfather of 13, husband of nearly 50 years, and a deeply committed and learned Jew. Over the course of his life, he was considered one of the most influential attorneys in his specialized field of law. Was a partner in prestigious law practices downtown, submitted briefs to the Supreme Court, which he made me read many times, and had been published many times over. Notably, he had overcome his stutter to orally argue in court and appear before Congress countless times, as well as davening from the Ovid. Now you know his starting and his endpoints. Allow me to color the middle with the how and the who. My father was brilliant. He was honest and an exceptionally hard worker. I remember growing up hearing the garage door open at 11:30, 12:30 sometimes. I wasn't supposed to be up, but I was. And that's when he would get home early on when he was trying to make partner. That he worked so hard sometimes Friday night dinners, he would literally be resting his head on his hand, the elbow on the table, because he had put in so many billable hours that week. That was how hard he worked to provide for his family, to give us the kind of life he wanted to give us. He was an independent thinker. Anyone who spoke to him knew that right from the outset. He was self-taught as a Baal Teshuva in many varied disciplines and incredibly precise. He overcame long odds to accomplish much. He did so with a clarity of purpose, intellectual rigor, and integrity that enriched all those who were around him. My father was a great man. His professional accomplishments were many, and he did love the law. And he really did love the law. But while he took great pride in his career and devoted himself endlessly to his clients, he devoted himself even more to his family. He would often say to me, "A career is great, but remember, at the end of the day, it's just a way to put food on the table." You see, more importantly, he was a fundamentally good man. I mentioned clarity of purpose earlier in reference to his professional pursuits, but he brought that same clarity of purpose to his personal life, his faith, and his family. A favorite pastime of our community, as many of you know, is complaining about day school tuition. He never did. I mean, never did. In fact, he was adamant that his grandchildren receive a Jewish education as well. Once my sister and I, being smart Alex when we were young, pushed him on it just to see how he felt. And we did the math like real wise guys. And we showed him all the years and all the children and multiplied across what we thought the day schools were charging in tuition. And we said, if we had been going to public school all these years, we could have had any number of luxury cars in the driveway right now. He responded with a twinkle in his eye and said, "First of all, why are we talking about cars? We should be talking about a beach house." But to answer your question, absolutely not. Your tuition is the best money your mother and I have ever spent. Remember, kids, children are the only wealth that lasts. As you can see, he walked the walk. He cared dutifully for providing for his family well after the point where he had earned a respite from the grind of billable hours and servicing clients. I asked him years ago if he could slow down at work, take some time to relax. God's sake, pick up a golf club. Something, any hobby. He wasn't interested. He said he wanted to keep working because he was actually doing what he thought was the best work of his career. After 50 years specializing in this one field of law. And crucially, he wanted to work for as long as he could to put away more for the grandkids. As my older sister said, he was always looking to make things better. It's fitting his favorite passage during davening morning prayers was Ashrei Ish Yishma L'Mitzvotecha V'Toratcha Yisbarach Yisim Alibo. Happy is the person who obeys your commandments and takes to his heart your teaching and your word. He was truly one of a kind. I don't say that lightly. A few of the many examples. At the last minute, my father would often invite people from shul over for Shabbat meals. He would see someone new in shul, introduce himself, and if they didn't have plans for the upcoming meal, invite them over. There's a common refrain in our house: how many people are we having for lunch? We'll see. His precision and clear writing professionally lent itself to a deep love of ancient Hebrew etymology and authentic Hebrew pronunciation. Such were his passions. Pronouncing the ayin and chet, as my brother-in-law referred to correctly, were of great emphasis. It bothered him deeply. Why does the aleph and the ayin sound so much alike in modern day Hebrew? He didn't care if he didn't sound like everyone else while davening at the Amud. And for some years, he may have drove Rabbeinu Mer a little crazy with his pronunciation. He just wasn't convinced that the current pronunciation was a capital T truth of the matter. He pursued truth wherever he could. He built our family sukkah from scratch. From scratch, drawing the specs by hand on design paper. He went to Brooklyn Technical High School as a teenager. He was very well-rounded. Conversed fluently in engineering, science, obviously his specialty, the law. He assembled the raw materials himself into panel and the opening panel, the greeting panel. We, as you can imagine, did not have the lightest sukkah, and certainly it wasn't the easiest to build, but he didn't care. This was his way of Hiddur Mitzvah, another way of saying enhancement of the divine commandment. My father also looked at the bencher and noticed something I don't think anyone else has noticed. He noticed that no one knew the tune to the Zemer Mayopis. It's the Zemer typically listed after Mayadidu Minufateh. I wouldn't say it's page filler, but it's nearly page filler. It's the Zemer that everyone skips over on the way to Yarivon. He thought it was a tragedy that we had lost this piece of our culture to time and circumstance, but he devoted hours and hours of his life tracking down information about this long-lost Zemer by inquiring with every musician in class that he could find from the West Coast to Israel and back. After years, ironically, he ended up finding the answer right here in suburban Maryland. He eventually found the answer and was instrumental in having pieces published about it in the Jewish press and other platforms online. Last example here, he never, and I mean never, turned down an opportunity to give to charity. Whether it was in shul with the pushka coming around, a Rav coming directly to our house, we would invite them in, ask my mother to get the checkbook, sit down with them, schmooze, and cut a check. Or more sizable discrete donations that he made to institutions around the Maryland area that he never wanted anyone to know about. He wasn't interested in being seen as the smartest guy. He wasn't interested in being seen as the most righteous person. There was so much more to him, including a sense of humor. It's been alluded to a couple times already, but I'll flesh it out if you allow me to. After years of not being able to prevent his grandchildren from stealing the afikomen at the Seder, he resolved to end this losing streak by way of very creative means. He went out to a professional acting agency in downtown DC and hired a professional actor. This actor's role was a role of a lifetime, I assure you. It was during the Seder to stand by my father's side and be the afikomen security guard. This is real. I am not having a breakdown to a degree. This happened. I showed up to my parents' Seder one year, and there was a stern-looking 6'4" man in the corner of our dining room, standing next to my father's chair and looking directly at the afikomen holder. The grandkids loved it. I mean, loved it. Myself and my sister, we were a little mortified. We weren't sure how to explain it to our loved ones. Of course, in the end, the grandchild did get your hands on the afikomen as he had masterminded, which then led to this fake brouhaha between this fake security guard being fake fired and fake escorted from our home. Evidently, my father had been planning this with the actor for weeks. He later showed me the email chain where they had exchanged dozens of emails on that. The actor, it turns out, was thrilled to have another paid acting credit on his resume. As tears come to my eyes at the magnitude of this loss, you know, a smile comes to my lips when I think back on the good times we had. the rain-soaked camp out in Cub Scouts, throwing the ball around in the front yard, playing chess every Friday night, rides back and forth to Little League, and Sunday trips downtown to museums, followed by a meal at a insert the failed kosher restaurant downtown here. Small things that perhaps only a son would know of his father. I don't mean to diminish my sister's experiences with him, but I'm talking about how every time sitting next to him in shul, as he said the words, "Vanecha," meaning your sons or your children, literally, during the Shema, he would reach out and place his hand on my knee. How lucky I was to have you as a father. What a privilege it is to be your son. I will miss his counsel. I will miss talking to him about the news of the day. I will miss his unabashed confidence that suspenders can and should be worn with every outfit. I will miss trying to solve the world's problems with him at the Shabbat table. I will miss him emailing us a PDF of really dense OSHA law and jokingly informing us there will be an exam in the morning. I'll miss coming downstairs in the middle of the night and seeing him in his study reading encyclopedias. I kid you not. I will miss going to shul with him. I will miss him. Shulchan Aruch cautions when preparing a eulogy not to exaggerate the virtues of the deceased. And so I didn't exaggerate. I didn't need to. My father was a great man. My father was a good man. My father was the real deal. He was everything I said and more. As is so often the case with the son who worshipped his father, he was my hero. Talmud Yerushalmi talks about one of the more mystical passages that before the deceased is buried, their consciousness in one way or another is still with us. And some say that they can still hear the eulogies as if it were through a dream. I pray for once Chazal was being literal. This is not in the Gadol. I pray that I have one more time to say, Father, thank you. We love you. We will miss you dearly.
Hey.
Please excuse me, I'm very taken by my brother's words. Everything he said is 100% true. Thank you everyone for being here today to honor my dear Abba. About 2 years ago, my Abba and I had a conversation where we talked about if something like this were to happen. As I live in Israel and have for the last 5 years, my Abba asked me to promise him that if something were to happen, that I would not fly in for his funeral. My Abba felt strongly that he didn't want to be the reason why I would leave Israel, even for a short period of time, in case it was the catalyst for me leaving Israel permanently. As I was also newly married at the time, my Abba didn't want me to have to uproot my family and my life on his behalf. As always, my Abba was trying to put his family's needs before his own. It was a difficult conversation to have, but my Abba was quite convincing. So ultimately, I made the promise. A few months later, I came back to him and told him that this promise was weighing on my heart and was just too hard to bear. I promised him that I would take into consideration all the factors that he was concerned about, and that I wouldn't come if it was too difficult to do with my growing family.
My Abba eventually released me of that promise, which is why I am, thank God, able to be here today. I thank God every day that my Abba understood my perspective and was willing to reconsider. But I completely understand the lesson my Abba was trying to teach me. My Abba is was one of the most generous and selfless people I've ever met. My Abba always put his and his devotion to his family unwavering, so much that he would have rather that I stayed in Israel with my family than to be there for him on his last days. He would have rather give up those last moments together than to have me disrupt my life in Israel. This was my Abba. Unwaveringly devoted to his family, selfless beyond measure, and most of all, incredibly generous and giving. Most of you probably know my Abba as a highly accomplished lawyer who argued before Congress multiple times, has published several articles in various law journals, and was an expert in his field. To me, he was all that and so much more. To me, my Abba was the big, strong man who used to hold my hand as we walked to shul on Shabbat morning when I was little. He used to offer me his pinky to hold. And to be honest, I'm shocked that I never dislocated his pinky with how strongly I held on to it. To me, my Abba was the man who called me sweet, sweet every day of my life. To me, my Abba was the man who instructed my siblings and I to say goodbye to Shabbat after every Havdalah. To me, my Abba was the man who used to take me and my siblings to DC for the day, where we would visit museum after museum, and then would treat us, taking us out to a fancy kosher French restaurant that used to exist back in the day. To me, my Abba was the one who played a game with me and my siblings, and later my nieces and nephews, that he made up called, I'm thinking of a mystery number. This is how my sister Masha was completing algebraic equations at the age of 5, or as she said 4. To me, my Abba was the one who used to correct my English papers. I can hear his voice now. Chaya, be concise and be clear. If the word doesn't need to be there, take it out. No need to use big fancy words. Use is just as good as utilize. For me, my Abba was a man who was willing to spend $100 just to buy me a beautiful, classy dress. To me, my Abba was the one who sparked political debates at every Shabbat table, no matter how polarizing the topic might be. To me, my Abba was the one to offer me and my siblings cars, just because he knew we might need them. To me, my Abba was the man who jokingly responded to the news of my engagement with a, well, nobody asked me. To me, my Abba was the man who nicknamed my now husband Israeli James Bond at our engagement party. To me, my Abba is the one who arrived in Israel for my wedding and spent his first evening in Israel walking the streets of Jerusalem, crying out of joy. And to me, my Abba was the man who spent the entire day with me as I labored at home the day before I gave birth to my sweet baby Yishai. He also sat with me on the living room couch, reading the baby book to know exactly when we should leave for the hospital. He was the one who urged me to start tracking my contractions, and it's a good thing too, because I gave birth just a few hours later. I will never forget watching my Ima and Abba wave to me from my balcony as I labored in the parking lot outside my apartment while waiting for my doula to arrive. To me, my Abba was the man who would walk into the maternity ward after me and my sisters gave birth and adamantly praise us with a strong, very good. To me, My Abba was the one who'd walk into the room where my 1-year-old was playing and announce, "It's Sapper!" and then start playing the guitar with him. In this week's Parsha, Yaakov and Esav reconcile. And when they meet, Esav says, "Yesh lo rov," meaning I have a lot. And Yaakov answers, "Yesh li kol," meaning I have it all. This interaction is often noted as a nuance in how we look at our lives. We have the choice to feel content with what we have and see bracha everywhere, or we have the option to see things differently. My Abba faced many challenges in his life, but he always made the best of every situation. He came from humble beginnings, but took all the tools at his disposal to build himself up and create a beautiful life and family. I am honored to have such incredible parents and my Abba. They both worked incredibly hard to provide for me and my siblings, and they gave and continue to give everything they have to us. Their generosity is limitless. My Abba was born on Pesach. He used to joke that he broke up the second Seder. In the Torah, Pesach is always referred to as the time where we need to remember where we came from. Well, my Abba was a storyteller of our family. He used to share our family stories with us, from stories about his own parents, his grandparents, and even to stories about my Ima's parents and aunts and uncles. My Abba's own story started with a lot of tragedy. He lost his biological father, Mordechai Grishko, at the age of 3. This is the man my brother Mordechai was named after. A few years later, my grandmother remarried, and that's how my father became Arthur G. Sapper. He adopted Grishko as his middle name, and Sapper became his last name. My whole life, my Abba honored his adopted father and everything he gave him. But deep down, I know that losing his biological father at the age of 3 was a huge loss for him. He had very few memories of him, but those that he had, he cherished. It also pained him that the Grishko name would end with him. Well, my siblings and I do not carry the name Grishko. So my Abba's story and the name Grishko is not in us. Just 2 months ago, my husband and my baby and I came to the US to visit for the first time in 3 years. Thanks, Corona. We spent all Sukkot here. We shopped, spent time with friends and family, and overall just enjoyed ourselves. Perhaps it was Mina Shemayim or something, but I felt incredibly close to my Abba during this time. He was so positive, so warm, so understanding, and so supportive. He also seemed very introspective to me. The highlight of my trip was spending hours just talking with my Ima and Abba in our sukkah, joking around and talking seriously about important topics like the fate of Israel, politics, community, Am Yisrael, family values. A few weeks ago, I actually shared with him how grateful I was that we got to spend some quality time together. And I thanked him for making me feel so loved and cared for during the entirety of the trip. I'm so glad that I had the chance to share with him how much those few weeks together meant to me. I will never forget his warm, bear-like hugs, and the lack of them will leave a gaping hole in my heart. I want to know that nothing can fill the loss that I feel. I hope, please God, with time, to be able to slowly fill this hole with love for others, as He would want me to do so. Everything my Abba stood for came from his love of the Jewish people, the state of Israel, Torah, HaKadosh Baruch Hu, and of course his family. I love you, Abba. Oh my.
Gary Coleman.
I will beg everyone's indulgence as unlike with Mordechai, much of my speech is not survived. But some of it is worth repeating. When we think about Art Sapper, look, I never expected to be here speaking his feeling. Saw him just a week or two ago, still alive, so positive. We went into Deborah and Art walking on Shabbos. We may end up spending a lovely Shabbos afternoon. It's one of many memories that we will cherish forever. Speaking for myself, I think it was Art's ability to leave an impact, to create cherished moments that made him such a special person. Art was an individual in so many ways, and to so many people. As was cited, he was an attorney, not just any attorney, but one at the top of his game. One who was qualified to speak in the Supreme Court. And in his industry was one of the most influential people of the last several decades. As an author, he had writings published that were cited in the Jewish press, Forbes, Brigham Young University Journal, and Wired. Such an eclectic collection, with such an eclectic individual. And Art will tell me, I'm having an article published, but you won't find it interesting. But as a friend, I would look. And whilst the topic was not always interesting to me, and I could not always follow the arcane rules and regulations and laws, the clear prose and the organized thinking was always something worth reading. As a linguist, you all know Art was unique. To mention his dedication to the use of Hebrew as was spoken, or as close as was spoken thousands of years ago in Eretz Yisrael. It wasn't that long ago that he and I spent a bit of time debating, in fact, the meaning and the origin of the word Abra, which you'll be reading very shortly in the story about Joseph's rising to the viceroy of Egypt. As a Jew, Art, I think, was like our ancestors in Mount Sinai. He would do, and then he would hear. His faith in God was palpable. His desire to fulfill the commandments strong. But like our ancestors, that wasn't enough. He really did want to understand the truth. Those of you who are fortunate enough to ever hear Art lead a prayer service, I'm sure remember his unique pronunciation. And I hope you also remember Giovanna that he infused his prayers with. Heard the words about Art as a family man. I saw the joy he had in tutoring his grandson remotely in Ohio. Joy he felt whenever he saw his grandchildren, even if his hearing aid wasn't working. Right? And the risk that he and Deborah took to travel in the midst of COVID to Cincinnati, Israel, important family events. What a great family. And as a friend, I found him generous and open-minded. He was a man of very strong principles and opinions, but whilst he would fight his corner, he was also open to change if you could, in the rare cases, demonstrate he was wrong. It was rare. He was truly interested in others, as you mentioned. He's a man of good humor. He had a very big heart, two big heads. He was intellectually curious, always seeking to discover the truth. And he was actually someone they always looked forward to. spending time with. So who then was on Sapper? Well, perhaps the words of the prophet Micah might serve. And what does the Lord require of you? Prophet asks. To act justly, to love mercy, and to walk humbly with your God. Having on Sapper as a friend has enriched my life, actually. You live short the life of others like this nobody.
Please rise for the communion while they will pray. Yamali Rachamim, Shochein, Babarohim, Amsei Menuchon Torah, Hanfei Ashkina, Malos Kedoshim Utorim, Kizara, Kiyamasi Remus, Ishmas, Asher ben Mordechai, Jolat Yolamo, Babur Shanakim Spaluim, Yaras Paras Nishmaso, Began Eden, Himenu Chaso, Okay, Balarachamim Yasti Rehu, Seiser Knafab Yolomim. Yitzror b'Torah Hayimas Nishmaso Adonai Nachlaso B'Yanuach B'Shalom B'Shkavo B'Nomar Amen. God full of compassion who dwells on high, grant proper repose on the sheltering wings of your presence in the lofty levels of the holy and pure, who shine as the brightness of the firmament unto the soul of our Sapper who has gone to his world, and for his memory we pray. May his repose be in paradise. May the Master of compassion bring him under the cover of God's wings, bind his soul in the bond of life. May the Lord be his heritage, and may he repose on his resting place of peace. And let us respond. Amen. This concludes this portion of the service. In a moment, we'll all follow Art's casket out to the hearse. The hearse will slowly creep up the hill in front of the synagogue. We can follow by foot until it gets to the top of the hill. And then at that point, those who will be continuing on to the burial should please get in cars and line up behind the hearse. Burial will be at Mount Lebanon Cemetery in Delphi. Shiva will be observed at the Sapper home here in Silver Spring through Thursday morning. But I want to clarify that Minyanim will be through Mincha on Tuesday. Mordechai expects to leave after Mincha Tuesday evening. Sarah will most likely leave at some point on Tuesday. But Deborah and Masha and Kaya plan on sitting the entire Shiva at the Sapper home. People should please note that for Shiva visits, please do wear a mask. If the pallbearers would please come forward.